If you are following her on Instagram, you might have heard of her. She goes by the handle Ballerina Farm.
We are talking about everyone's favorite and arguably the most famous homesteader tradwife influencer, because she has gotten herself into yet another controversy because the internet simply cannot leave her alone. Obviously, we are discussing Ballerina Farm.
Today we're going to be talking about Ballerina Farm, Hannah and Daniel Nealman, who are this couple, this trad wife brand that exists online. They have their own business, Ballerina Farm.
So we have a woman that is competing in pageants and has a bunch of young women looking at her saying that what is aspirational is motherhood. I mean, what is more beautiful than that?
The picture they paint is objectively beautiful. It is aspirational. It makes people yearn for a better, more beautiful, more natural way of life. And I will never say that that is a bad thing, because she is inspiring so many people to make changes in their life. And I think that that is obviously a good thing.
Okay, that's my birthday present from Daniel. Hoping they're tickets to Greece.
Where's it from?
I don't know, the boys took it off.
I took it off.
It's from Ukraine.
So, plane tickets? Ooh, a hat I can wear in Greece.
It's not a hat.
It's not.
Oh, my A-game friend!
Eggs in it.
Great, they can gather eggs.
So cute. It's really cute. It's a cute one.
That's the best. You're welcome.
Hi everyone. So if you have been on the internet for the past 3 to 4 years, chances are that you have probably already come across the term tradwife. Tradwife is an acronym for traditional wife and is used as a broad term to refer to this genre of content creators of women who chose traditional gender roles over equality, that are deliberately choosing to be homemakers, choosing to give up on their careers, choosing to be submissive to their husbands or partners. Tradwife content has been steadily gaining popularity over the last couple years. There are various versions of tradwife content. There was the stay-at-home girlfriend thing, for example, that was trending on TikTok a while ago. On a typical tradwife blog, you would find recipes, homemaking tips, Bible verses, this romanticization of the 50s and 60s era, featuring 50s ads, aesthetic, fashion, this sort of longing for a return to tradition. This kinds of content has always been popular on the internet, but I would say that it really took off in 2020 with a video from the BBC featuring tradwife influencer Elena Kate Petit titled "Submitting to My Husband Like It's 1959, Why I Became a Tradwife." In it, it features Petit's blog called The Darling Academy, where she literally says, to quote, "Your husband must come first and he needs to know he does." Ever since tradwife content has taken over the internet like a storm, there has already been so much that has been said about tradwives and the particular tradwife influencer that I'll be delving into later on, and throughout this video I'll be referring to some of them. One of the first things that I watched in preparation for this video is Shanspeare's 2-part series on tradwives. In their videos, Shanspeare mentions this research article on tradwives by GNet, where the authors tracked the online activity of 36 self-proclaimed tradwife content creators over the course of 10 months, through which they came up with this sort of levels of the tradwife rabbit hole that they called the tradwife landscape. The first level of the tradwife landscape is titled the conservative right tradwives. These kinds of tradwives would rarely ever explicitly mention politics on their page, but their content would still have a right-wing feel to them, as they would subtly promote things like traditional gender roles, feminine lifestyle, being a homemaker, being a stay-at-home mom, or homeschooling. So influencers like Nara Smith and Emily Mariko, I would say, fall under this category, as while they have never come out and explicitly stated that they're tradwives, their content is centered around them being a homemaker, whether it be through making meals from scratch or showing off their pregnancy bump. There is a lot of overlap between these kinds of tradwives and the sort of crunchy, granola, cottagecore aesthetic. Cottagecore is an online aesthetic that embraces simple living and a slower pace of life. Some of the key features of cottagecore include living in the countryside, surrounded by beautiful nature, being self-reliant through growing and raising your own food, making your own clothes, baking your own bread. And on that note, bread in particular, sourdough bread has become like the mascot for the cottagecore or the tradwife movement. I don't know why that is, but if you want to know whether somebody is a tradwife or not, just look for freshly baked sourdough bread on their page. It's gotten to the point where I've seen comments left by people where even if they just casually mention that they like to bake as a hobby or they like making sourdough bread, people automatically assume that there's some traditionalist anti-vaxxer who gives birth without pain relief and homeschools their kids. It's really weird. But despite seeming harmless on the surface, this level of tradwife content serves as an entry point to some of the most extreme content on the internet, such as the alt-right tradwives, the most extreme level of tradwives that explicitly promote things like traditionalism, nationalism, white supremacy, anti-feminism. These influencers would openly call themselves tradwives. These are people like Lauren Southern, who is an open white supremacist who has made videos where she claimed that women's sexual market value decreases with age that are still up online.
Women love strength and resources. Men value youth and fertility. These are age-old archetypes of warriors and mothers. And pairing the masculine with the feminine like this has secured our existence since the beginning of time.
Pearl Davis from Just Pearly Things is another example of the alt-right tradwife who started off on YouTube spewing your typical red pill ideology.
The role of a wife, right, is supposed to be, right, here's the man, here's the woman. Okay. You're supposed to be his helpmate. You're supposed to submit to his authority.
To now making merch saying that women shouldn't vote. This whole tradwife phenomenon has left the internet divided, to say the least. There are some who think that they are the worst thing ever, that they're pushing back on women's rights, eroding all the social progress that feminism has made for women. On the other hand, some, typically the alt-right, have held these women up on a pedestal, referring them as these idealized images of femininity and motherhood, the antidote of the poisons of the world like low birth rate and hookup culture. And others have attempted to take the middle ground, a more neutral stance, claiming that these are just individual choices that these women have made. And who are we to tell a woman how to live her life? I mean, after all, isn't this what feminism fought for women's right to choose and form their own opinions? Well, today I'll be touching on a bit of all of that, and I'll be doing so by talking about perhaps the biggest tradwife influencer on the internet right now, Ballerina Farm. So, Ballerina Farm is an online platform and brand created by 34-year-old former ballerina Hannah Nealman, who is now a homesteader, farmer, a mother living in rural Utah, hence the name Ballerina Farm. With nearly 10 million followers on both TikTok and Instagram, as well as over 1 million subscribers on YouTube, she is perhaps the biggest tradwife influencer that is there right now. Ballerina Farm consists of Hannah showing off her life at her homestead with her family and her farm. Her family includes her husband Daniel Nealman, who is also an influencer of his own with the handle Hogfathering, although he is nowhere near as popular as Hannah. We'll get to that later. And a whopping 8 children. Their children are only about 3 months apart in ages, so they keep having children back to back, with their current youngest being just a couple months old. On her page, you'll find aesthetically produced videos of her making meals for her family, with her making almost everything from scratch, making her own bread, making her own cheese, churning her own butter that was made from the milk that they got directly from their cows at the farm. They seem to have an obsession with raw milk. In a lot of their videos, you would see Hannah and her children just straight up milk the cow into their cups and drink it. I'm not going to show it here because I personally think it's disgusting how they couldn't even be bothered to pasteurize the milk to at least heat it up before drinking. Their obsession with raw milk goes as far as to the point during one of their camping trips, they decided to bring their family cow with them because they haven't had anyone to look after it. So the entire trip, they dragged along 7 kids and a cow so that they could have fresh raw milk whenever they wanted. Now, there is no scientific evidence that raw milk is any better for you than pasteurized milk. If anything, it's quite the opposite. This study by the CDC, for example, looked at outbreaks of dairy-related illnesses in the United States between 2007 to 2012. And out of the 81 outbreaks that they looked at, 81% were from non-pasteurized milk. Children especially are more prone to the pathogens and bacteria found in raw milk. People have been saying this to Hannah time and time again. In every single video that she puts up of her and her children drinking raw milk, there are always comments warning her about the bacteria in it. But Hannah doesn't seem to care about safety. What she does seem to care about is aesthetic. This image of being a natural, earthy, hands-on family who does everything by themselves. I previously talked about how bread, particularly sourdough bread, has become almost like a symbol of tradwives and traditionalism, and Hannah takes this a step further by literally selling her own sourdough starter called Willa on their website. I haven't seen any other tradwife harping on about sourdough bread as much as Hannah, probably because she is selling it. She puts up at least one video of her making sourdough bread every week, and in the captions of one of these videos, she went on to say, sourdough is a God-given marvel. The reason is simple. Sourdough starter can be made at home with nothing but flour, water, and heat. Once it ferments, it replaces the need for yeast, baking powder, and baking soda in bread. That same starter can be fed water and flour and live indefinitely, being split and passed down from generation to generation. Starter is hard to kill. Immigrants brought it from the old world where it survived the long sea voyage and spread throughout the Americas. Mormon pioneers packed it in their wagons to make flapjacks and fry bread as they rumbled across the Rocky Mountains to Utah. I did an experiment and started my own starter 2 weeks ago with just flour and water and placing it by our wood-burning stove. Yesterday, it gave me deep satisfaction to bake bread with my first homegrown starter. Like, dude, it's just bread. Calm down. But on a similar note, as you may have guessed, Hannah and her family are deeply religious. Both Hannah and Daniel come from a Mormon background. She has made videos where her and her family are getting ready to go to church on Sunday. Hence, they have so many children because children are easier to indoctrinate and brainwash. Oh no, sorry, I meant... They are sacred souls who are gifts from God, so you must have as many as humanly possible.
I have felt this feeling 7 times now as I bring these sacred souls to the earth after I hold that newborn baby in my arms. The feeling of motherhood and bringing them to the earth is the most empowering feeling I have ever felt.
Also, another pillar of Mormonism is being self-reliant, being able to depend on yourself for your food, clothes, resources, which ties in with her brand of having a farm, growing their own food, making everything from scratch. Hannah herself even harps on about the importance of growing your own food, having that connection with food, knowing where your food comes from.
We had this dream to raise our children on a farm, and to really bring awareness to what it takes to get food on the table. And also educating people that you can do little things in your own space, in your own lives, to contribute to what you're eating, whether that's, having a sourdough starter and making your own sourdough bread, or having chickens and getting fresh eggs every morning. Whatever that is, taking part some way so that you can feel that satisfaction when you sit down at a meal and you know where the food comes from.
This philosophy of growing your food, knowing where your food comes from is so important to them that during last year when Hannah competed in the Mrs. America beauty pageant and had to come up with like a tagline for the state that she was representing, it was literally, know your food, know your farmer. This is like their motto. It's like a mantra. Speaking of pageants, Hannah's platform Ballerina Farm always had a steady, decent, modest following up until January of this year when she competed in the Mrs. World beauty pageant just 2 weeks after having a baby, after being crowned Mrs. America. Mrs. America is a beauty pageant similar to Miss America, except the participants would have to be married and be a natural-born female. After this article by the New York Times titled, "She gave birth 2 weeks ago, now she's in a beauty pageant," alongside an image of Hannah breastfeeding her baby at the backstage, all dolled up, went viral, her following skyrocketed. After being crowned Mrs. America, she moved on to the next round of Mrs. World just 2 weeks after having a baby. Beauty pageants where Hannah has to get her hair and nails done, cover herself from head to toe with makeup and spray tan, wear skimpy clothes and parade around in front of people on stage, may seem like an odd thing at first in Hannah's aesthetic of being this modest, religious mother, this farm girl who is not afraid to get dirty and do the hard work, but that's exactly what makes her this perfect, idealized image of Christian femininity. It's this perfect balance where most of the time she is this pious, modest, religious woman, this mother who is pure and wholesome, but she can also be this sexy bombshell in front of her husband even after giving birth just 2 weeks ago. This philosophy of being natural and hands-on is something that permeates through all aspects of their lives, not just in the foods that they eat, but also in childbearing and rearing practices. All 8 of their children were born at home, where Hannah birthed them without any pain relief, except for one, which we'll get to later. Their kids are homeschooled. They have one Mormon teacher who comes in once a week to tutor them, so one teacher for all 8 children, and they don't have any nannies. Hannah looks after all of them pretty much on her own. The kids entertain themselves through playing at the farm. They have no TV, no iPads, no phones, although I do find it a little strange how the kids aren't allowed to have phones, yet they have no problem with plastering their faces all over their social media to their millions of followers. Their followers know their kids' names, their ages, when they were born, how they were born even, because just like any good Tradwife family vlogger, Hannah has vlogged and documented the births of every single one of their kids. But all in all, Hannah and her brand Ballerina Farm embody this old school way of living. A lot of their followers are older people who watch her living at this farm with kids, milking animals and making sourdough bread from scratch, and get a feeling of nostalgia. Millions of people have put her up on this pedestal where her and her family are living this perfect, idealized life just the way nature intended, just the way God wanted. Their content portrays an image of this wholesome family at the farm, living in the countryside, making their own food, and just trying to make it by doing their best, even if they may not have enough. Except they do have enough. In fact, they actually have more than enough. Despite the heavily curated image of being this perfect family that Hannah tries to portray online, some aspects of their life has been questioned by a lot of people. First is the topic of children. Hannah and Daniel currently have 8 children and they're planning to have even more. When you have that many children living in one place, it would be impossible to give them the best possible care to meet each of their individual needs. A lot of times the older children would get parentified, where they would be forced to raise and look after their younger siblings, causing them to miss out on their own childhood. The topic of safety, especially with that many children living in a farm, has been brought up numerous times. It really took off in 2020 when Hannah announced that they bought a new cast iron stove for their family that was built in 1991. This stove has 4 ovens that are set at different temperatures, always preheated. It helps heat up their entire home, which is why they always keep it running. It is always piping hot, ready to use, which a stove that is never turned off cannot be safe for a home with 8 young children living in it. I feel like at this point, it's not just the matter of them not being able to take care of their kids, it's about them literally not caring at all. Like at this point, they've had so many kids, they're probably just like, whatever. In some videos where you see the kids riding a bike or a scooter or something, they never seem to wear a helmet or any protective gear. Hannah herself doesn't seem to take safety very seriously either. Like I said, she doesn't seem to care at all. In one of their recent videos where Hannah was driving a tractor, she was literally holding her baby with one hand and driving the tractor with the other. And as you can see in this screen cap, she doesn't seem to have a seatbelt on. But perhaps the worst example of this was when a rooster at the farm attacked one of the kids to the point they were bleeding from the head. I'm obviously not going to show it here. I think it has been taken down now. But the fact that she took a photo of it and put it up on Instagram in the first place is so bizarre to me. Going back to the stove though, people were really intrigued by this stove. I mean, Hannah uses it in pretty much every single one of her videos. It is always in the background. So people started looking into what kind of stove it was and found out that it was from a British company named Aga, and it costed over £22,000 or 30,000 US dollars. Spending $30,000 on a stove, that goes completely against them being this simple, modest farmer family that is just trying to do their best. So people kept looking further into Ballerina Farm, in particular, what kind of money do they have to be able to spend that much on a stove? And they found out that Daniel Neilman, Hannah's husband, is actually the heir to JetBlue Airlines. His dad, David Neilman, founded JetBlue, which is one of the major airline corporations of the United States, alongside 4 other commercial airlines, with his net worth being $400 million. At this point, people were starting to get really confused. So here we have a man who has inherited millions of dollars, enough to be able to give his family the best life possible, with enough childcare, nannies, private chefs, workers, literally anything that could ever need and want. Yet Hannah still has to wake up every morning and make every single meal from scratch, look after the kids, work at the farm, and do basically everything by herself. What is going on here? This all came to a head in July of this year when reporter Megan Agnew from the Sunday Times went over to interview Hannah Neilman, publishing this article titled "Meet the Queen of the Tradwives and Her 8 Children." Now, the original article is behind a paywall, but I was able to find a free version that I'll have linked below in my sources, and this article has gone viral since. So many people have been talking about it. It was trending on TikTok. Hundreds of videos have been made about it here on YouTube. Their comment section has been the most polarizing it has ever been since the release of this article, because it portrayed an image of Ballerina Farm that could not be any more different to what is shown online. So let's start off by how Daniel and Hannah got together, how it all began at the very start. So Daniel was 23 years old and Hannah was nearly 2 years younger than him when they met through a mutual friend at a basketball game. After meeting her, Daniel wanted to get married straight away, tie the knot, have kids and settle down, but Hannah was still in school at the time and did want to make a serious commitment until graduating. Daniel kept pestering her, pressuring her to go on a date with him. She kept refusing. This went on for 6 months until one day Hannah mentioned to Daniel that she was flying to New York from Salt Lake City in a 5-hour flight. Turns out, Daniel was in the same flight as her. They were in the exact same flight, going to the same place at the same time. They were even sitting next to each other. I remember checking in and them saying, "You are 5A and you are 5B. I just thought, no way, that's crazy. I mean, how else could it be, unless it was some divine intervention, a sign from God himself that it must be fate that they're meant to be together. Except Daniel's father owned the airline. So he was able to pull some strings behind the scenes, find out where Hannah's going, what time she is going, what flight she is in, essentially stalking her, and then booked a seat right next to her so that he could be with her. Honestly, when I read about this, it literally made me feel sick to the stomach. Even now, just by talking about it, it's making my skin crawl. But unfortunately, it gets so much worse for Hannah from this point on. Because you see, Hannah wasn't just some casual ballerina who took some classes as a kid and is now only dances as a hobby. No, she was on her way to be a professional ballerina. She got into Juilliard, which Juilliard, if you didn't know, is one of the most prestigious performing arts schools that there is in New York, if not the world. Some of the most talented actors and actresses like the late Robin Williams, Kevin Spacey, Adam Driver, Viola Davis have all been alumni of Juilliard. Literally anything performing arts related that you can think of that's from New York, whether it be Broadway, jazz, blues, it comes out of Juilliard. So this is not like some Ivy League school that you can get into as long as you have the right connections and money. No, to get into Juilliard, you have to have talent. You have to be exceptional. Especially the dance division of Juilliard only accepts 24 students per year out of the entire applicant pool, 12 men and 12 women. And Hannah didn't just get in, she got in through a scholarship. They don't just hand out scholarships at Juilliard. After the whole incident at the plane where Daniel manipulated Hannah into being with him, Hannah finally gave in and decided to go on a date with him. But she still wanted to take it slow, date for a year, finish Juilliard before getting married and settling down to have kids. But Daniel was like, no, we have to get married right now. So within a month into dating, they got engaged, 2 months in, they got married, and 3 months in, she was pregnant. So she wasn't able to finish Juilliard as she became the first Juilliard undergraduate to be expecting in modern history. So how does one go from going to Juilliard for ballet, living in New York, to now working at a farm with 8 kids living in rural Utah? How did Hannah have this change of heart? Is this what she really wanted? No, she says. I was like, she pauses. My goal was New York City. I left home at 17 and I was so excited to get there. I just loved that energy. And I was going to be a ballerina. I was a good ballerina. She pauses again. But I knew that when I started to have kids, my life would start to look different. The part where she said, I was going to be a ballerina, I was a good ballerina, made my heart sink when I first read it. She then goes on to say, our first few years of marriage were really hard. We sacrificed a lot. I gave up dance, which was hard. You give up a piece of yourself. And Daniel gave up his career ambitions. So Hannah had to give up her lifelong passion for ballet, a potential career, which for her meant giving up a piece of yourself, while Daniel had to give up his career ambitions, which right off the bat seemed very unequal. Giving up career ambitions is nowhere near on the same level as giving up your whole career, your dream job that you could have had potentially. And even then, Daniel turned out just fine. He did not have to make any drastic sacrifices on such a level in order to afford this lifestyle. He was still able to work under his dad, getting a job as the director of his father's security company. When asked if this is what he wanted, Daniel was able to provide a much more definitive answer. Yes, he says. I expected Hannah to be more at home with the kids, but she said, I watched my parents working together, so whatever we do, we got to do it together. They claim to run this farm, do parenting, do everything together, calling themselves co-CEOs, but Daniel clearly seems to be the head of the household. Everything is set up and run in the way that he wants it. It seems to be all about him. He wanted to live in the western wilderness, so they did. He wanted to farm, so they do. He likes date nights once a week, so they do. He doesn't want nannies in the house, so they don't have any. The only thing that was supposed to be for Hannah was this small barn that she wanted to convert into a ballet studio, but it ended up being the schoolroom for the kids because the kids are homeschooled. Despite coming out to interview Hannah, journalist Agnew rarely ever seemed to get a moment alone with her. Throughout the entire interview, Hannah continued to get interrupted by her 8 children or her husband, who repeatedly interrupted her, talked over her, answered for her. At one point, Agnew literally said, I can't, it seems, get an answer out of Neilman without her being corrected, interrupted, or answered for by either her husband or a child. I also find it interesting how, throughout the article, Agnew continues to refer to Hannah by her last name Neilman, but Daniel as Daniel by his first name. It almost reads like Hannah has no identity of her own aside from being her husband's shadow, having no voice, to the point she is only being referred to by his last name. So at this point where Hannah has been stripped off of her passion for ballet, has her identity reduced down to only being a wife and a mother, to the point she can't even be able to speak for herself, the only thing that she seems to be allowed to do that is for her own are the beauty pageants. Which is how the article starts. Agnew's article starts off describing a disheveled, vulnerable imagery of Hannah lying in bed days after giving birth to their 8th child without any pain relief. Throughout the pregnancy, she kept fit, weightlifting, having ice baths, taking supplements, but after the birth, she was so weak that she was even questioning whether she would be able to attend the Mrs. World pageant that was due in a couple of days. On the 5th day, she says, I looked at Daniel, her husband, and I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to go. This is a lot. I was bleeding and swollen, and milk was coming in. This was jarring to read, because it is such a stark contrast to what she shows online, of her being this superhuman that is able to do everything on her own with ease, but the reality couldn't be any more different. They have a cleaner but no childcare. Neilman does all the food shopping, kids in tow and cooks from scratch. They don't do ready meals. Despite the more traditional aspects of their relationship, Daniel is a hands-on father, taking the kids out to the farm and doing all the laundry. The children appear to look after each other quite well too. There are so many that they seem to have become an almost self-sustaining entity. Still, Daniel says, Neilman sometimes gets so ill from exhaustion that she can't get out of bed for a week. This is the reality of being tradwife, of having this kind of lifestyle. You know, a lot of moms watch Hannah, follow her content, and wonder, how does she do it all? How does she manage to work at the farm, look after 8 kids, make every meal from scratch, and yet still get time to keep up with her dances and do pageants? Well, she doesn't. Like it said in the article, it leaves her so exhausted to the point she can't even get out of bed for a week. People already had suspicions that Hannah and Daniel were parentifying their children, like I said before, and this proves it. There are so many kids that they seem to have become an almost self-sustaining entity. Daniel himself had put up videos of the kids cooking for themselves in the past where he said, if you don't make these kids food, they'll figure it out themselves. This is not okay. Yes, teach kids how to do chores and cook, but they shouldn't be left to fend for themselves. Kids shouldn't have to figure out how to eat, how to look after themselves. You as the parent are supposed to provide that. The oldest of their 8 children is only about 12 years old. A 12-year-old should not be held responsible to take care of their family. This is abuse. Speaking of children, when Agnew finally gets a moment alone with Hannah with Daniel at the room to take a phone call, she asks her about childbearing, about her decision to bear children at home without any pain relief. None at all, she shakes her head. Why? I don't know, I just never loved taking it. She stops herself. Except with one of the kids. I was 2 weeks overdue and they were 10 pounds and Daniel wasn't with me. She lowers her voice. So I got an epidural, and it was an amazing experience. Where was Daniel that day? It was shipping day and he was manning the crew, but the epidural was kind of great. She pauses and smiles. It was kind of great. No words. I don't even know what to say at this point. She also asks them about the amount of children that they have, on how do they come up with it, do they plan pregnancies? No, Daniel says. When he says no, Neilman responds gently. It's very much a matter of prayer for me. I'm like, God, is it time to bring another one to the earth? And I've never been told no. But for whatever reason, it's exactly 9 months that she is ready for the next one, he says. It's definitely a matter of prayer, she says. It's a matter of prayer, but somehow it's exactly 9 months, he says. When I first read this, I got so frustrated because you can tell that Hannah is trying her best to salvage this. She's sensing how bad it's coming off as. She's like, oh no, we just pray and ask if it's time for more children. And Daniel's like, yeah, we pray, but somehow it's always 9 months. The article ends with the same thing that it started with, which was the pageants, which are the only thing that Hannah is allowed to do, that she is allowed to have, that is her own. And the sequin gowns, well, they used to be in her bedroom cupboard, but with all of her stuff and the children's stuff, the cupboard got so full that there weren't any more room. So Daniel put them in the garage. So yeah, that was the article. Daniel put them in the garage is the last sentence of the article. So, like I said, since the release of this article, this has taken over the internet like a storm. Most people were heartbroken for Hannah and gave her immense amount of support. Her comment section flooded with people giving their condolences and sharing similar experiences. But there were also plenty of people pushing back and defending Hannah. One of the most common points that people were making was that the reporter was biased, that they came in with an agenda and was planning a devious attack against the traditional nuclear family and all that stuff. As one comment read, "Hannah, please never give opportunity to liberals, feminists, Democrats, and leftists to go to your home and interview your family. They hate you and your family for what you represent and are. White, Christian, health, wealth, hardworking, beautiful, etc." Now, firstly, this is false because there is literal video evidence of Daniel acting and behaving in the way that he is described in the article, even without the presence of any liberal journalist or media. There are plenty of moments where Daniel would talk over Hannah, interrupt her, just like he is described in the article. In some videos that were posted by Daniel himself on his account, you can see him just standing around not doing anything at the farm whilst Hannah and the kids do all the actual work. This is not me cherry-picking videos to make him look bad. This is something that he himself has put up. There was this one point in the article where Agnew was wanting to speak to Hannah, but Daniel just kept dragging her all over the farm, showing her around, and Agnew was a guest, so she obviously didn't want to be rude, but Daniel just kept talking and talking. At one point, Hannah literally calls for him to come in, and Daniel's like, "All right, we'll be heading your way," then proceeds to walk in the opposite direction. Daniel wants to take me to see the new dairy farm buildings, while Neilman goes back into the house to make lunch for the kiddos. We stop at an irrigation ditch, which he explains, the offices, which he explains, the milking stations, which he explains. I check my watch, feeling edgy. I want to talk to Neilman. "Just one more stop," he says. Neilman calls him. "Okay," he says to her. "We're just heading your way," he adds, driving in the opposite direction out into the fields to show me another ditch. I literally screamed when I read this bit of the article because that's exactly how he behaves in the videos on their channel where he talks about the farm.
Sneak peek. So this is a giant Roomba vacuum, basically. That's the manure robot. So this is what we'll be zooming around here. Yeah, it's electric on battery, and it will go around and slurp up all the manure and then take it to our dump pit, and then it goes out to the manure lagoon. So that's pretty cool. And these are the watering troughs. So we're using the crane to set these trusses. So again, this is called a gambrel roof barn, and that is just meaning that's the shape. You know, you've got this two-tiered type of roof. There's lots of different roof types. There's more of a rounded roof. There's more of just a standard, what they call like a bank barn or standard slope roof. This one here in our valley is a very traditional slope. A lot of the old dairy farms had it. That's why we're attracted to it. You'll see.
Another reason why I'm not buying this whole argument of the reporter having a bias against the Neilman family is because Hannah herself since put up a response to this, and let's just say that it has not done her any service. After the original article went viral, Agnew published a follow-up article where she went back to Utah for a second interview with Hannah. This time around, she did manage to get more time alone with her, although she was still interrupted by her children. The way Hannah went about this second interview is what I like to call PR response to damage control. She very meticulously just walks around the topic, not addressing it directly or saying anything that might be deemed controversial. Like at one point, Agnew asks Hannah about how she felt about the backlash she often got from mothers for portraying motherhood as this beautiful sunshine and rainbow thing without any of the struggles, to which she says, "I feel like there's so much joy in making a beautiful meal for your family. It's very satisfying, especially when you have had some part in growing or sourcing the food that you have a connection to, and hopefully I'm inspiring women to do that." She didn't answer the question. She's talking like a politician would, avoiding the main point and just beating around the bush. And her actual response to this isn't much different. Now, I'm obviously not going to play the whole thing since Hannah didn't really have much to say aside from claiming that she was taken out of context.
A couple of weeks ago, we had a reporter come into our home to learn more about our family and business. We thought the interview went really well, very similar to the dozens of interviews we had done in recent memory. We were taken back, however, when we saw the printed article, which shocked us and shocked the world by being an attack on our family and my marriage, portraying me as oppressed, with my husband being the culprit. This couldn't be further from the truth. Nothing we said in the interview implied this conclusion, which leads me to believe the angle taken was predetermined.
Which, how can the angle taken be predetermined if she is literally quoting you? How can you be misconstrued if you're being quoted? So I'm not going to get too much into what she said. Instead, I want to focus on how she said them. There's this one point in the article where she said that the day she married Daniel was the greatest day of her life. And I just want you to listen to the tone of her voice when she says this.
For Daniel and I, our priority in life is God and family. Everything else comes second. The greatest day of my life was when Daniel and I were married 13 years ago.
There is no emotion in her voice. She's speaking in a monotone. As this comment puts it, you sound like you're reading a heartless script written by your husband. Some people who have survived abusive relationships chimed in and said that this is exactly how they behaved back then, to remain in denial that it's really not that bad, that if they kept trying and kept putting in the work, it will all work out in the end, because the alternative, which was admitting that you are in an abusive relationship, that you are being abused, that you are a victim, was too much for them to come to terms with. With the added context of the article, people began viewing Hannah's content differently. A lot of old clips, older videos resurfaced that showed some clear red flags, among which was this egg apron video where Daniel gives Hannah this egg apron for her birthday. He didn't even wrap it, he acted smug about it, especially when Hannah has already made it clear what she really wanted numerous times, which was a trip to Greece.
It was my birthday present from Daniel. Hoping no tickets to Greece.
Where's it from?
I don't know, the boys took it off.
I took it off.
It's from Ukraine.
So, plane tickets? Ooh, a hat I can wear in Greece.
It's not a hat.
It's not.
Oh, my egg apron!
Eggs in it.
It's great. They can gather eggs.
So cute. It's really cute. It's a cute one.
That's the best. You're welcome.
Thanks, honey.
Not for a long time.
Imagine birthing 8 kids, giving them the best upbringing possible, doing most if not all the work at the farm, and getting just an egg apron for your birthday. The way she said my egg apron makes me think that she already had it and he just re-gifted it to her. The amount of times she mentioned that she wanted to go to Greece, like, dude, your dad owns like 5 airlines. Just give her tickets to Greece. She probably needs a vacation. But then, who else would do all the work at the farm and look after the children, right? And he couldn't even be bothered to wrap it the way he said you're welcome without being told thank you first. Like, there is just so much to unpack in that one little video alone. The second most common thing that people kept saying in defense of Hannah's lifestyle was that Hannah has made a choice. She chose this life for herself. And after all, people grow, people change, and so does your dreams and ambitions. She's a businesswoman now, a co-CEO, a mother. Isn't that so much better than being some silly little ballerina? I mean, look at the way she parades around on that stage during her pageants. You can't say that she's not empowered. This is what feminism is about, for women's rights to choose for themselves, even when it's something you wouldn't choose for yourself. Now, I'm going to go on a limb here and say that People who are claiming that Hannah chose this for herself have no idea what it's like to be stuck in an abusive relationship. For a partner to control every aspect of your life, your business, your finances, your children. Yes, of course, people grow and change, but those changes need to happen organically with time, within a good couple years at least. Like I said, Juilliard is serious business. I mean, to get into the dance division of Juilliard, being one of the 12 female students that they take out of thousands of applicants, and to get that on a scholarship, no one does that unless you are seriously dedicated about dancing and doing it professionally. So to go from that to getting pregnant 3 months into a relationship, making such a drastic change to how she is now, to me, it doesn't seem like a choice that she made on her own. It feels like a choice that she was forced to make. I mean, Hannah said it herself in the article that she had to sacrifice a lot for the sake of her marriage and this lifestyle. She had to give up dancing, which was like giving up a piece of herself. And in her content, you can sort of sense that she still longs for her previous life of being a ballerina. She would often do her hair in a way that a ballerina would. She would use classical music that ballerinas would dance to as the background music for her videos. In the kitchen where she spends most of her time, she has framed a picture of herself as a ballerina to reminisce on. She still dances now whenever she gets a moment to herself, and the way her eyes light up when she dances, you don't see that in any of her other videos. She often tries to cope her loss of giving up her dreams by resembling what she has to do now with dance.
I know people ask all the time, like, don't you miss being, dancing, like the art of dance and all the things, and I do love dance and I miss the dancing and all things, but there's so many other things you can be artistic with, including cooking.
Like in the captions for one of her Instagram reels, she went on to say, not by coincidence, I'm sure, the same music I would do a bare ballet routine to is also the perfect accompaniment to bread making. I don't dance full days like once gone by as I'm on to my next adventure. Making sourdough has helped this striking transition from the bright stage to our bucolic yet eventful life in the country. Again, to me, this doesn't seem like a choice that she willingly made. It more so seems like a choice that she had to make, and she's trying to convince herself otherwise. And people who claim that Hannah doing these beauty pageants is empowering for her are completely missing the point. Like I said before, these pageants are the only thing that Hannah gets to do for herself, the only thing that she gets to have from her life before. Ex-Mormon influencers Jordan and McKay pointed out in their video on the Ballerina Farm's article that if this is the only thing that Hannah gets to do for her own, where she finally gets to have a moment for herself, you could see why she would be so determined to do it, even when she has just had a baby 2 weeks ago and is still swollen and bleeding. With the added context of the article and everything else, her doing these pageants is just sad, and even then it is pushed to the side as the article ends with Daniel putting her sequined gowns for the pageants in the garage. Some people have tried to cope by saying that Hannah, being a business owner, a wife and a mother, has put her in a much more stable position than she would have been had she worked as a performer, where she probably would be paid less and her income would be sporadic. So even if it's not what she initially wanted, it has worked out for her in the end. Now, firstly, those two things are not mutually exclusive. Daniel and Hannah could have easily waited till the both of them had finished school, got settled in their careers, and then get married and have children, which is what most people do. Hannah could have worked as a professional ballerina and then go on to creating her own business and having children and still would have been fine. Well, maybe not with 8 children, but if she had the normal amount of children, like 2 or 3 children, she could have still had what she has now without sacrificing her dreams. And she would actually have more of a safety net had she worked a professional job than working at the farm. Say, as a professional ballerina, if she went on to working at huge shows like in Broadway or something, she would have been doing what she loved, and she would have had insurance, she would have had legal contracts, she would have had a team of professionals working with her to make sure that she's not overworking herself, instead of working at the farm on top of taking care of 8 children, leaving her exhausted to the point she can't even get out of bed for a week. Secondly, Hannah may be the face of Ballerina Farm. She is the ballerina of the Ballerina Farm. She may be doing all the work at this business. She may be the co-CEO or whatever they like to call themselves, but she doesn't actually own any of it. In the Ballerina Farm LLC, so the business registration for Ballerina Farm, which is publicly accessible, her name is nowhere listed. When you open a business in the United States and register under the LLC, you have the opportunity to add every single member, to register under as many owners of that business as you want, yet it is only registered under Daniel's name. So Hannah doesn't even own the business that she is working so hard for. It's unlikely that she has any other assets or property of her own. She probably doesn't even get paid for all the work that she's doing. And this is why people are concerned. Feminism doesn't have anything against women staying at home and raising children, but when your husband is the sole provider, when you're completely relying on him for everything, if your marriage ends for some reason, you'll lose everything. And this is what feminism really fought for women to have their own assets, own property, own bank accounts. Because so many women back then were left homeless and destitute after their husbands died or left them. And a lot of these religious Mormon women, these tradwives, are facing the same reality today. One of them is Jenny from the TikTok account Life Take Two. Jenny was a Mormon just like Hannah, who got married and had kids young just like she did, but even after doing everything right, doing everything that she was told by her family and religion, when her marriage ended, she was left destitute. She went viral a couple months ago by sharing her story. I'm going to play pretty much the whole thing. It is a little long, but I feel the need to show it because I think it is so important and powerful.
If you are a young 14, 16, 21-year-old girl, listen up. I drove to the grocery store. I need to grab some milk and bread and a couple things, flipped open the bank app on my phone, and I've been sitting in my car crying ever since because I never have enough money. And why do I never have enough money? Because when I was a 19-year-old girl, I fell in love. My Mormon faith told me that I was supposed to be a stay-at-home mom. I got married. I started having babies. I dropped out of college. I never had a career. My only jobs that I ever had in life were a waitress at the Olive Garden and managing a pretzel maker in a mall. Oh, my first couple years of marriage, I decided that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, so I bought a windshield business. I was 20. And my Mormon stake president reminded me that women weren't supposed to work, so I quit my own business, handed it over to my husband, took my name off of it. I would work our family business throughout the next 24 years of my marriage, but I never got paid. I didn't have a salary. My name wasn't on it. I literally worked for room and board. That's it. I would eventually also launch a custom home building company with my uncle as the architect and my friends as the builder, my designs, my realtor. But again, because my husband was the man, his name was on all of the projects, his name was on the business. I remember one of the last custom homes that I built, we sold it and made about a $260,000 profit. That money all went into his bank account. I didn't even have a bank account. I should have said that in the beginning. I never had a bank account. He would give me little envelopes of cash to go grocery shopping with. Anyway, that house sells, the money goes in the bank. I just asked if I could buy myself a piano with the money. I had worked on building that house for 2 years. All of the money went into his bank account. Nothing was under my name. I got a piano and I got a free house to live in and I got groceries. So I found myself divorced at age 44 just 5 years ago, and within just a few months I was living in my car. While he made about $250,000, he would eventually quit that job so that he wouldn't have to pay alimony and child support. He has only paid alimony one time ever in the 5 years since we've been divorced. Once ever. Right after my divorce, I remember being really confident about my ability to get a job, so I put together a resume. I remember one of the first interviews that I had as a management position for a windshield company, similar to the one that we had run. And the man actually laughing as he was interviewing me, like he was really sympathetic. He wasn't being a douchebag, but he was laughing. And he's like, so let me get this straight. You helped manage your family windshield business with your husband, but you were mostly a stay-at-home mom, and all you did was like the marketing and the hiring, firing, and some of the strategy for the business. But it became really apparent that I needed so many more skills to have any type of management job. I couldn't even work the basic computers. He told me in the interview, please don't apply for any more jobs like this. You are not qualified at all. You're not capable of doing this unless you go back to school and get your degree or get some different experience. And so I ended up, my first job after my divorce was $11 an hour, 4 hours a day, working as an assistant to a school teacher in an elementary school. I made $44 a day. For 24 years, I lived in $1 million homes. I vacationed all over the world. I spent my summers in Hawaii. I could buy myself $500 jeans, diamond tennis bracelets. We had boats and RVs and whatever I wanted. And it never bothered me once that my financial security was dependent on that man being in love with me. I never realized that him liking me or not liking me or finding me sexy or attractive or interesting determined whether or not my children could eat, whether or not I could buy myself a fucking jug of milk and a loaf of bread. So I had my 5th surgery in 2 years, 2 weeks ago, and I'm supposed to be in bed resting, and I can't because I've worked 7 days a week since my divorce 5 years ago, which is why I'm covered in paint and looking like crap. We actually have a 4-day weekend here in Tucson, and since my partner isn't working, he's working on furniture flip partner projects with me. I have no retirement. I have no savings, no education, no resume. I was almost a straight A student throughout all of my education. I went to college at age 17. I had dreams for my future. I'm working so hard to get myself out of just perpetual side hustle hell. There's not a day that goes by that I don't wonder why. Why I didn't have a fucking backup plan. Why my kids eating and having stability was dependent on a romantic relationship. Why nobody told me to put money in the bank. Why nobody told me, don't have babies until you have an education and some experience. Don't have so many kids. I wish somebody had told me to put my name on our vehicle loans and to put my name on our houses. I wish somebody had told me that it's okay to put those babies in daycare for a couple days a week and go to college and have a job. And I think I need to do an entire Tradwife sequel, because you can be happy and rich and loving your life like Ballerina Farm until the guy walks out. I want you guys to imagine for a minute, even rich Hannah, if Deanna walked out, if all of his financial backing and he had to sell the farm, and then what does she have? Find another rich boy to marry? I just don't want one more woman to DM me, comment, send me their stories, cry to me about how hard it is for them to support their families, and I am so tired of living my own story. We have to make this stop. Raise your daughters to be financially independent. Focus on their futures and educations just as much as you focus on your sons. I wish that someone had done that for me.
But say Hannah really did make that choice. Say even though she was this highly talented ballerina who went to Juilliard and had a bright future ahead of her, after meeting Daniel and getting pregnant, she really did have this change of heart and wanted to leave everything behind and settle down and have babies and live at a farm. But choices don't exist in a vacuum. As John Donne once said, no man is an island. We're all connected. We live in a society that has broader institutional, political, historical, religious, and social contexts which influences the choices that we make. Imagine for a moment that you are a girl born into a Mormon household, just like Hannah and Jenny were, and ever since you were born, you were told that your only purpose in life was to be a wife and a mother. Ever since you were young, you were told to dress a certain way, act a certain way, speak a certain way, sit like a lady so you can finally get a husband when you're older. You were given baby dolls to play with to prepare you for when you do have children. You were told that your career ambitions are redundant, that you must always rely on a man, be his helpmate. In the church congregations that you would be dragged to every Sunday, you had to sit through hours of talks and speeches like this one.
She who can paint a masterpiece or write a book that will influence millions deserves the admiration and the plaudits of mankind. But she who rears successfully a family of healthy, beautiful sons and daughters whose influence will be felt through generations to come deserves the highest honor that man can give, the choicest blessings of God.
So after all this conditioning, all this brainwashing, when you finally do find a man and get pregnant and decide to give up your education, your career, and become a stay-at-home mom, is that really a choice that you made independently on your own accord? Or is there something greater at play, years of conditioning and coercion that led you to that point? Dismissing Hannah and millions of other women's circumstances like hers as individual choices is reductive and grossly simplifies the situation at hand. This paper by Michael L. Ferguson, titled Choice, Feminism and Fear of Politics, argues that this idea expresses a fantasy world without any politics, where we don't have to address structural issues, where we can blanket everything simply as a choice that people made. As Ferguson says, this is a vision of a world in which we all get along, not because we agree, but because we studiously avoid conflict. Ferguson wrote her paper in 2010 in response to the phrase choice feminism, coined by feminist Linda Hirschman, to name the belief that feminism has liberated women to make whatever choices that they want, whether it be to pursue a career or to be a stay-at-home mom, to sleep around or to practice celibacy. Feminism supports whatever choices a woman makes as long as it is made consciously. This is a very popular belief to feminism, probably because it is so alluring and inclusive to everybody, and it avoids the difficult and uncomfortable aspects of its political and systemic goals. But this idea of feminism still has some obvious drawbacks. Firstly, as Ferguson states, it understands freedom as the capacity to make individual choices and oppression as the inability to choose. As we already discussed, people don't live in a vacuum. We live in a society. As one great woman once said, you exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
You think you just fell out of a coconut tree?
So as long as we live in a Christian, patriarchal, white supremacist, capitalist society, our choices are going to reflect that. Also, diminishing choices as individual responsibility alone means that when those choices don't work out, you can punish and belittle women who have made bad choices. You can treat them as an anomaly, as an exception, as an outlier, instead of addressing the flaws in the system that led them to making those choices in the first place. Say, whenever women like Jenny or others come on the internet opening up about their negative experiences with being a tradwife, there are always floods of comments telling them to make better choices, that they've married a bad man and now should take some accountability, as if it's that easy to differentiate between a good man and a bad man. The second drawback with choice feminism, as Ferguson puts it, since the only criterion for evaluating women's freedom is individual choice, we should abstain from judging the content of the choices women make. Because feminism granted women the right to choose in the first place, any critic of any choices that a woman makes would be anti-feminist. But like I already said, our choices to an extent are reflective of the society and the system that we live in. So if you can't critique the choices that people have made, then by proxy, you're not allowed to critique the system. In that way, feminism gets hijacked to unironically uphold the patriarchal system. Ever since the release of the Times article, Hannah's comment section is filled with this kind of sentiment. One comment on her Instagram under her response video reads, "Feminists, you are a woman, you can do anything you want. Women staying at home and taking care of family, oppressed," with clown emoji. This comment has over 40,000 likes. Finally, this view of freedom is supported by a particular historical narrative. It is the women's movement in the past that has made it possible for women to make free choices in the present. This view of feminism comes from a very privileged perspective that assumes that we live in a world that is now post-feminist, where women everywhere, all over the world, already have all the rights and are now fully liberated, but that is not the case. Currently, we live in a world where women's rights to bodily autonomy is being stripped away, and women like Hannah, who has had 8 children without pain relief, are put up on a pedestal through being promoted in the algorithm and being crowned Mrs. America. This is no coincidence. These two things are directly interlinked. Also, because choice feminism ignores politics and structural issues, it fails to take into account who can actually make choices. Say if Hannah came from a lower class background and was struggling to make ends meet, people wouldn't be rewarding them for having this many children. They would be telling them to use a condom, get a job, close your legs, hire help. Choice feminism fails to differentiate between those who can choose and those who cannot. Analysis of how class, race, sexuality, and power affect women's choices is often missing. There are plenty of women who would love to have more children, stay at home with their children, but can't do so because they have to work. Saying that it is just a choice that they made completely negates all of that. So we talked about Hannah. Let's now talk a bit about Daniel. One of the main things that people want to know when it comes to Daniel is why. Why is Daniel doing this? There is no doubt that Daniel is abusive or at the very least negligent, which is still a form of abuse. I mean, religion or no, letting your wife, who you call your soulmate, get so exhausted to the point she can't even get out of bed for a week is plain abuse. There is no other way of putting it. The reason I think Daniel is doing this is because he is secretly jealous of her. He is envious of her. He wants what she has that he knows money can't buy. Daniel is an heir to JetBlue Airlines. He has inherited millions of dollars that he didn't work for, that he didn't earn himself. A lot of people think that the rich, the ultra wealthy are out of touch and have no idea how privileged they really are, when that is not always the case. Many wealthy people, especially those that are born into wealth, tend to be extremely class conscious. They very well know that they didn't work for their money, that they had it handed to them on a silver platter, and if it wasn't for their wealth, they wouldn't be where they are today. And many of them are secretly insecure about it and would go to lengths to prove that they are deserving of their money, that they are hardworking, that they know how to make it on their own. Which is why they're obsessed with the myth of being the self-made man to the point it is almost like a fetish to them, which is why they would make up bogus stories about how they came from nothing, how they only had a small loan of $1 million. They would do all these absurd social experiments where they would try to give their wealth away and live like a normal person to prove to others that they can make it. I used to think that it was so that they would seem relatable to normal everyday people and gain their approval, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure it is the case for some of them, but for most of them I would say that it's not necessarily the approval from others that they're after, it's approval from themselves. It's to prove to themselves that they are deserving of what they have. Because I can tell you, as someone who grew up poor and struggled with money pretty much all my life, I couldn't care less if you do come from money or have those connections. It's rough making it out here, and whatever you need to use to get a leg up, go for it. I really don't care whether someone made it on their own. The only people that do seem to care are the rich people, the millionaires and billionaires, because that's how they can justify the amount of money that they have. Hannah, in a lot of ways, is the complete opposite to Daniel. She came from a humble beginning with a family that ran a flower shop. The reason she even got into doing pageants is to be able to afford her ballet lessons and pay her tuition for Juilliard. Then she managed to get a scholarship to help her out with tuition. Hannah is the self-made person that Daniel wants to be, which is why he keeps her in this state so that he can vicariously live through her. I mean, when they met, he had more than enough money to support her through her dreams, yet he still wanted to get married and have kids straight away to lock her in. Daniel also grew up Mormon just like Hannah and had a very suburban upbringing. I'm sure he was surrounded by plenty of religious Mormon women who would have had no problem submitting to him. So why did he go for Hannah, whom he had to pester for 6 months, come up with a devious plan just to go on a date with her? Because it was never about finding someone to actually build a life with, it was about tearing someone down. It was about caging the free bird. One of the creators that I follow called Cecilia Regina pointed out in her video on Ballerina Farm that Hannah is Daniel's trophy wife in the most literal sense imaginable. Just like how you would kill a deer and hang its antler on the wall to show off, Hannah being on that stage in that shape, covered in spray tan and wearing a tight swimsuit just 2 weeks postpartum, is showing off Daniel's trophy. He killed her spirit, he killed her dreams, he killed her ambitions. And to this day, he gets to fulfill his fantasy of being a self-made man by making sure she has to do everything by herself, that she has to cook every meal from scratch, that she gets to have no childcare, no nannies, that the kids are homeschooled, that she doesn't even get to have pain relief when giving birth to their children. And before anyone points out that maybe they just like the crunchy, natural way of living, well, no, not when she gets to be his trophy, when he is directly getting something in return. In the night of her Mrs. World pageant, Daniel puts this video up of them at the event, and as you can see, the kids are eating processed foods, eating sweets, drinking soda. He had no problem with them eating ready-made foods now, because it was never really about being natural. It was about control. It was about making sure that after doing everything by yourself, you get so tired by the end of the day that you have no time to work on your dreams, your ambitions, or anything for yourself. But guess what? Despite having everything being taken away from her, Hannah still continues to be successful. She built this platform, gained millions of followers, she is charismatic, people like watching her, and Daniel hates it. I mean, in the same video of her at the Mrs. World pageant, at the start he says passive-aggressively, "Another event tonight, if you win, it means more work." Who says that? I can't even imagine saying it to anyone, let alone your wife, the person that is meant to be your soulmate. He cannot be happy for her even for a split second, because he knows that without her, he would be nothing. Daniel has tried building his platform for quite some time now. Despite being affiliated to Hannah, he has nowhere near the same amount of following as her. Even on YouTube, their usual videos with Hannah easily get to 1 million, 2 million views, but when it's mostly Daniel, they can barely hit 100k. It's because he's just really boring to watch. Like, dude, even a piece of wet cardboard has more charisma than you. And that's really all it comes down to. Yes, their deeply patriarchal Mormon upbringing plays a role, but at its core, it's jealousy and envy. It's knowing that no matter how much money he has, he can't buy charisma, he can't buy an engaging personality that people like to watch, and so to make up for it, he tries to keep Hannah under his control as much as possible, hoping that just by being related to her, he can make up for it. But as we've seen, it doesn't work like that. One of the reasons why Agnew's article on Ballerina Farm went so viral is because Hannah's story is something that a lot of women could relate to. Maybe not to the extent that Hannah has, but self-sacrifice, sacrificing yourself for the sake of your family, partner, children, putting their needs before your own, is something that I'm sure a lot of women have done at some point in their lives, which is why I think so many women came to the defense of Hannah after that article was published, claiming that she has made a choice because they themselves had to make similar sacrifices, similar choices for the sake of their families. And by claiming that this is a choice that Hannah has made, they can really convince themselves that it is a choice that they made that has worked out for them. But because Hannah's story is so universal to women, I think it can also serve as a cautionary tale on what not to do. Now, I'm not saying this to blame Hannah for her own predicament, but understanding what may have led her to being in this position can prevent things like this from happening in the future by giving a warning to women. Women in our society are raised with a scarcity mindset. Ever since we're young, we're told that we're not thin enough, not pretty enough, not good enough, so we must go on a diet, put on makeup, show more skin, get surgeries, change ourselves, alter ourselves to be more appealing to men. We are told that we're not complete unless we have a man, that regardless of our achievements, we're not enough, we're not a real woman unless we have a husband and children. When it comes to love and relationships, relationships, we are told that good men are scarce, that they're hard to find, so you must settle for the first guy that gives you attention. We are told that if we don't settle down within a certain time frame, that we will hit the wall, that our biological clock is ticking. You have to choose between having a career or a family, because life ends at 30. If you're not married with children by that point, you're a leftover woman. Nobody would want you, nobody will love you, and you will die alone with cats. Men, on the other hand, are raised with an abundance mindset. They are told that they are enough just the way that they are. They are told that they can have it all: career, wife, children. They can both be a family man and have a career, and they can take as long as they want to settle down, because men get better as they age, apparently. And even then, if their marriage doesn't work out, they can easily go find another woman. Because women are raised with a scarcity mindset, this belief that they're not enough, that there is not enough for them, that they must settle for less if they ever want to find love, this leads to self-sacrifice. To show that she is enough, to prove that she is worthy of love, she has to perform, she has to put others before herself, she has to sacrifice herself. Feminist Andrea Dworkin once said, "We have a double standard, which is to say, a man can show how much he cares by being violent. See, he's jealous, he cares. A woman shows how much she cares by how much she's willing to be hurt, by how much she will take, how much she will endure." For a woman, love is defined as a willingness to submit to her own annihilation. The proof of love is that she is willing to be destroyed by the one whom she loves, for his sake. For the woman, love is always self-sacrifice, the sacrifice of identity, will, and bodily integrity in order to fulfill and redeem the masculinity of a lover. Sacrificing yourself for the sake of your partner, children, family is such a defining experience of being a woman that no one bats an eye when you do. No one cares when you have to give up your highly successful career, your dreams, your passion for the sake of the family. Sacrificing your career, your body, your mind is something that you just do as a woman, because you, just as you are, is not enough. Therefore, you must prove to others by giving yourself up, sacrificing everything about yourself, and maybe then you will be worthy of being enough. Well, today I'm here to tell you that you are enough. You are enough just as you are, that there is enough for you in this world. If love is something that you want, there is someone out there for you in this world, regardless of your looks, your age, your career, for whom you don't have to change yourself. And if love is something that you don't want, then that's fine too. You are enough on your own. You are whole, you are complete on your own. You don't have to have a man to be a real woman. You don't have to have children to be a real woman. And you certainly don't have to give yourself up. You don't have to give up your dreams, ambitions, career. In fact, don't ever give up on your career, especially for a man. If you're a high-achieving woman in a professional field, whether it be a doctor, lawyer, a professional ballerina, you have to make sure that if you do choose to settle down with a man, that he is your biggest fan, your biggest cheerleader, that he is not jealous or envious of what you have, or else he is going to tear you down at every opportunity he gets. Once you truly embrace the abundance mindset that men are typically raised with and know that you are enough, that you already have everything that you need, you can truly be at peace with yourself. You can easily walk away from toxic relationships. You will not be swayed by the societal pressure that constantly tells you that you're not enough unless you have a man, have children, sacrifice yourself, do this, this, and that, because you already know that you are enough just as you are. And if others can't accept you as you are, then that's fine too, because as long as you accept yourself, you embrace yourself as you are, and you're not afraid to be by yourself, you're practically unstoppable. What I'm saying right now is unpopular. This is something that you probably don't hear a lot of, and there is good reasons for that. Throughout the process of making this video and reading Agnew's article, a scene from the 1996 film 101 Dalmatians kept playing in my head. It's when the villain of the film, Cruella, sits down at her office with Anita. As she compliments Anita on her work, she asks what will it take for her if she were to ever leave this job. Anita says that it would have to be a partner, that she is willing to sacrifice her job for a potential marriage and a family.
Your work is fresh and clean, unfettered, unpretentious. It sells, And one of these days, my competitors are going to suss out who you are, and they're going to try to steal you away.
Oh no, if I left, it wouldn't be for another job.
Oh, really? What would it be for?
Well, I don't know, if I met someone, if working here didn't fit in with our plans.
Marriage.
Perhaps.
More good women have lost a marriage into war, famine, disease, and disaster. You have talent, darling. Don't squander it.
Now, Cruella isn't wrong. More good women have been lost to marriage than war, famine, or natural disasters. But why would such a line be given to the villain of the film, whom you're supposed to pray for their downfall? Because these kinds of rhetoric are deliberately painted as being too extreme regardless of how true it may be. By giving such lines to the villain and then having them defeated by the end of the film, it sends the message that no matter how true they may have been, ultimately their vision of the world is too extreme, too unrealistic, and the way things are, despite how unhappy it may leave you to be, is the best that we've got. Well, today I'm here to tell you otherwise. I'm here to tell you that you don't have to do that. That if putting yourself first makes you an extreme person, then be the most extreme person to have walked on this earth. Don't settle, don't make yourself small, don't give yourself up for the sake of others. So I had initially planned to end the video right here, but as I started looking more into tradwives and the history of them, I found something significant that I really felt the need to mention, that I think serves as the final piece of the puzzle that puts it all together. That is the history of tradwives and how it came about. So I briefly spoke about Lauren Southern at the start of this video. Lauren Southern is a Canadian YouTuber. She was one of the biggest, if not the biggest female YouTuber at one point in the alt-right, white supremacist, anti-feminist side of YouTube. She gained popularity in 2010 through her extreme anti-Muslim, anti-immigration views. Her videos where she promoted traditional anti-feminist ideas that she made a couple years ago are still up on YouTube. Then, out of nowhere, Lauren disappeared in early 2019 and stopped uploading on YouTube. 4 years later, she returned explaining that she had gotten married and had a child, but that marriage has now ended due to all the abuse and violence that she experienced, leaving her as a single mother. She opened up about all of this in an unheard article titled "How My Trad Life Turned Toxic, The Online Ideology Doesn't Work in the Real World," published in May of this year, where she was interviewed by Mary Harrington. Lauren went on to explain how the rhetoric that she consumed in the alt-right circles, ideas of traditionalism and anti-feminism, have led her to be in an abusive relationship. At 22 years old, Lauren met a man in her alt-right circles, got married 4 months into dating, and then soon after that, she got pregnant. She was commended and praised by everyone around her for doing so, but behind closed doors, her situation could not be any more different. Lauren's partner was controlling, possessive, verbally and emotionally abusive towards her. After every fight or even any minor disagreement, he would leave her for days at a time. Sometimes he would even lock her out the house. Few weeks after their child was born, he got a job offer in Australia, forcing Lauren to leave her home, her connections, everything behind in Canada. She also forced her to get off YouTube since he didn't want her online activity interfering with his career. So now in Australia, miles away from home, friends and family, with no income, no job, no support, Lauren had to do everything. All the housework, cooking, childcare, even her partner's university work. She did everything right, everything that she was told to, yet it was still never enough. This, especially during COVID, was one of the lowest points in her life, where she became the closest thing to a modern-day Western slave, according to her. A couple years later, after experiencing 2 deaths in her family back in Canada, Lauren wanted to visit home. Her partner threatened to divorce her if she left, forcing her to sign an affidavit promising her return. But after she landed in Canada with her toddler, he texted her saying that because she had chosen to travel, the marriage was over. So Lauren ended up moving back with her parents, then getting a small ant-infested cabin surrounded by woodlands and trailers where everyone had to use a single washing machine to get by. She was now a single mother, finally getting back on her feet, yet her mental and emotional well-being finally began to improve. Now, as depressing as it may be, what ended up happening to Lauren is, I'm sure, not a surprise to anyone. But what was surprising to me is how quickly it happened. Like I said, Lauren is most definitely not the only one suffering this predicament. Many of these women who have previously promoted the tradwife lifestyle are learning quickly that this lifestyle is not what it claims to be. One of the reasons why these modern tradwives have such a steep learning curve is because most of them don't know the history behind tradwives, of what they're promoting, how it came about, and what it truly represents. This idea of a traditional nuclear family did not take off till the 19th century in the United States. The idea of a feminine, submissive tradwife who stays at home and rears children did not exist before that. You know, most women used to work back then, both outside and inside the home, and at home they had to cook meals from scratch, wash clothes by hand, make their own clothes, sweep and clean. These are back-breaking labor. There is nothing soft and feminine about that. But during the Cold War in the 1950s, a lot of the anti-communist propaganda showed Soviet women working in the factories, wearing boots and gunny sacks, with their children in daycare as the horrors of communism. So the American nuclear family was created to counteract that, where it was promoted that a cis-hetero white family with a mother and a father and children, with the man working outside and the woman staying at home with the children, is the ideal way to live. And thus began the cult of domesticity, or the cult of true womanhood, where a hierarchy was established among women. It was said that white middle to upper middle class women that possessed these four qualities, piety, purity, domesticity, and submissiveness, were the real women, the true women. This hierarchy was so legally enforced to the point black and brown women were forced to work under white women, regardless of whether they want to or not. This newspaper article published in 1918 stated that an ordinance would be passed forcing able-bodied black women to be put into work regardless of whether they want to or have to. Black women were put to work under white women as maids, cooks, nannies, and laundresses. They had to carry a labor identification card with them at all times to be showed to the police and labor inspectors when pulled over and interrogated to show that they are regularly and usefully employed, or else they would be jailed or fined heavily. Now, even though this article was published in 1918, civil rights movement went on till 1968, Cold War didn't end till 1991, so its effects were much more long-lasting. It was really not that long ago. There were still black women who are alive today who have this card. So black and other women of color, poor women, wives of black soldiers were more than happy to stay at home and be that submissive, feminine, traditional women that the government wanted them to be, but literal laws were passed preventing them from doing so because that was only to be reserved for middle to upper middle class white women. Modern tradwives, women today that want to embark on this journey of being a tradwife, most of them don't know about this history, about how the image of the 50s housewife was really used to establish a hierarchy. And when you don't know about this history, firstly, you'd be surprised at how much work it actually is. You'd be shocked at how exhausted you'd get, because those 50s and 60s housewives whom you so idealize, they weren't actually doing all this work themselves. They were hiring help, typically from black women who were forced to leave their own families behind to take care of theirs whilst they get to cosplay as housewives. Secondly, the way hierarchical structures work is that for you to remain in your position of power, there must always be someone beneath you to exploit, to walk over. One of the pillars of the cult of true womanhood is submissiveness, in particular, submission to men. This gave a rise to benevolent sexism towards white women, where white women were still regarded as less than white men, but in a more paternalistic manner. For example, white women back then were encouraged not to work outside because a true woman was too frail to work. She was expected to be delicate, soft, and weak. She was not to engage in strenuous physical activity that would damage her much more delicate nervous system. But benevolent sexism is still sexism, and as long as you uphold this hierarchical structure, you would always be next to exploit. We could never achieve true equality as long as we live under this hierarchy. Over the past few years, we have seen some of the major rights of women being rolled back. First, it was Roe v. Wade that overturned women's constitutional right to get an abortion. Then it was birth control, and now they're going after no-fault divorce. The next thing could be your right to work. Who knows? And many white women fail to make the connection that all of this is linked to the patriarchal hierarchy that they choose to uphold, that put them below men but above people of color, especially women of color. So they wish to maintain their position of power, not knowing that as long as there is a hierarchy, they will always be threatened to be exploited, to have their rights taken away. Feminist Bell Hooks talks about this in her book Ain't I a Woman, where she recalls the women's suffragette movement that granted women the right to vote that was led by white women who deliberately excluded women of color to uphold this racial hierarchy. Like their predecessors, white women consciously and deliberately supported white racial imperialism, openly disavowing feelings of empathy and political solidarity with black people. In their efforts to secure the ballot, white women's rights advocates willingly betrayed the feminist belief that voting was the natural right of every woman. It's easy to view Hannah from Ballerina Farm as this victim, as this damsel in distress who got swayed and manipulated by a man when she was young, but as I think more about it, I realize that there is a lot more to that. Yes, Hannah is being exploited and overworked, there is no doubt about it, but as a cis, white, attractive woman with a large platform, she still holds so much privilege compared to most women who are in a similar position as her. Ever since the release of news articles, Hannah has received an outpour of love and support from people all over the world. If she were to come out tomorrow and ask for monetary support, set up a GoFundMe to plan her escape, people would come to her rescue without a doubt. Most women who are in a similar situation as Hannah's don't have the opportunity to do that. And that is where I begin to lose sympathy. Because as exploited as Hannah may be, it would be crazy to think that at this point she doesn't know what she is doing. Through her content, by portraying her family as this picture-perfect all-American family, she is upholding this hierarchy that puts her over women that are not like her. And that is something that I can't stand for. So, in conclusion, tradwives are an online phenomenon that is definitely more than what meets the eye. At best, they're promoting a fantasy, and at worst, they serve as useful idiots to some of the most dangerous ideologies, which is why it generated such an emotive response from people after Agnew's articles came out, with so many people rushing to defend Hannah's lifestyle, because it broke their fantasy. It woke them up from this escapist fairy tale that doesn't exist in real life, that takes more work to maintain than one could imagine. I guess the biggest lesson to come from this whole situation is to not believe everything that you see online. As a general rule, especially if it's on the internet, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. When I first learned that Daniel was this multi-millionaire that was an heir to 5 different airlines, I initially thought that their content was all staged, that it's all fake, that there was an entire camera crew coming to their house to film everything, but the reality of it is so much more horrifying. Which brings me to the last thing that I want to quote from Agnew's article, where she goes on to say, "It was a life of contradictions. Children not allowed screens, but who are reality TV characters online for millions. A stay-at-home mother who has made a career out of being so. An analog, old-fashioned farm, only working because it is underwritten by social media cash. A choice, modern in her ability to have one, to do something so very traditional." And that pretty much sums it up. Ultimately, the goal of Hannah's content is to sell you a fantasy, this lifestyle that is promoted as the ideal, as superior than the modern way of living. And to borrow a point that McKay made on their channel in their first video on Ballerina Farm, just like how Hannah goes on about how important it is to know your food, know your farmer, know where it's coming from, I think it is just as important to know what you're watching, what you're really getting when you consume these kinds of content. When you watch any of Ballerina Farm's content, you're essentially watching an ad. Every single one of Hannah's video is linked to their online store where you can buy the ingredients that she is using in the video. Yes, it's not labeled as an ad anywhere because it is her store and her own products that she is using, but at the end of the day, she is still trying to sell you something. She is trying to sell you a lifestyle that doesn't exist, that at best is a fantasy that is hard to maintain, and at worst could trap you in the worst possible way imaginable. A lot of people, a lot of young women especially, gravitate towards the tradwife content because they're sick of living a mundane life where they have to get up every morning to go to a job that they hate only to get home and having to do it again the next day. They point to feminism as the culprit, the girl boss feminism that claimed that it was empowering for women to work, that women belonged in the workplace and their job was to break the glass ceiling. But it's not really feminism that pushed women into workplace, it was capitalism. It was capitalism that made it so that you can't survive on a single income anymore, where you have no choice but to work. Families and households weren't pushing their wives and daughters into the workplace because all of a sudden they believed in gender equality and feminism, but because they had to in order to survive. So this longing for an old way of living is not really a longing for tradition, it's a longing for a slower pace of life. It's a longing for more time spent with your friends and family. It's a longing for better quality food that isn't pumped with chemicals and preservatives. It's a longing for agency, independence, self-reliance, security, stability. And it is perfectly normal to want those things. It's perfectly normal to want to get off the rat race of capitalism where you must keep producing and consuming in order to keep the system running, but becoming a tradwife by sacrificing your career, dreams, ambitions is not the answer to do so. Doing so could potentially put you in a much more precarious position where you would always have your hands full without a moment to yourself, to the point you get so exhausted that you can't even get out of bed for a week, and if your marriage ends, you lose everything. That does not sound like the slow, perfect, ideal life to me. So yeah, that was my video for today. I definitely got carried away. The thing about working through a long form video like this one is that you often end up not using a lot of the stuff that you found when researching because there is no way to put it that feels right. One of those things was Bell Hooks' book, Ain't I a Woman, that talks about the role of black women in the feminist movement, how black women have been erased in history by being excluded both in the civil rights movement and in the women's rights movements. It's a shame that I didn't know how to talk about it in this video aside from that one little section on the history of tradwives, which is why I'm talking about it here. I really enjoyed learning about it. Definitely check it out if you're interested. And as always, thanks for watching, especially if you made it till the end. Leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Comment down below what you think, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!